Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live on this edition of V for Veles. We have in the house the man who needs no introduction. We were talking about Veles himself, the Dark Raven of the Deep State, giving you some inside, some incredible analysis and information. With that being said, Veles, welcome back, buddy. How are you?
I'm fine, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I mean, I can't complain. I could complain, but who's going to listen, right? The saying goes.
We got beautiful weather, man. Leaves
Yeah,
are
that's
finally
it.
changing.
Yeah, exactly. So I can't complain too much. So where do you want to start, my man?
Well, noting many of you are rolling into the show, so some of you may have to hit the back button. Yeah, we really need to strap in for today's program, my friends. Overall, today I've got a lot of content about hidden meanings and symbolisms.
Yeah.
I've got a segment that started as kind of a high level on Diddy, and then I took it in a direction that I got done writing it, and I thought, oh, baby, that's even for me, that's a little much. We've got some lithium news.
And more and more lithium being found everywhere.
Yeah, no kidding. And,
suddenly, out of nowhere, never. Yeah,
out of nowhere. We weren't hiding this, we swear.
No.
A really great book I'd like to tell you all about, and then what do you call it? Some clarity from I got a movie clip or two for you. Patrick Ryan made one of his cryptic statements that I had to unpack that I'm going to share with you. We're going to cover what happens when Lieutenant Colonel Murray, Alex Craner, and Tom Luongo are all on the same program. Lions, Tigers, and Bears. Oh, my. Yes. We've got some Epstein and Abercrombie. We've got some symbology and ritual concerning bridges. And no joke, totally serious. There may be a way to reduce artificial intelligence power usage by 95%, but there's a slight catch. And then my final segment is some ponderings about the world in which we live. So, to all of you joining the show, happy Thursday morning or afternoon or evening, depending on what part of the world you're living in. And let's jump into it. So, lithium battery prices have dropped per Zero Hedge. There are several factors behind that, including increased production and reduced demand. Industry expectations still believe demand will increase 9-fold by 2040 due to electric vehicle demand and renewable energy storage. That's a bit of contradictory because at least with the U.S. car makers, but Japan as well, there's a move away from pure electric hybrids. I've shared with all of you what people on the ground in Europe told me this last summer about their being forced to purchase EVs, whether they wanted to or not, due to European Union government mandates. I also love the language in articles like this because I'm not blaming Zero Hedge, but about China's overproduction of batteries reducing prices, contributing to the lowering of prices. My comment about that is, first, China has a vested interest in lowering those prices as it reduces the costs of the products they use them in. The second thing is China continues to grow its economy through physical assets being produced rather than through finance, insurance, real estate, etc. in the FIRE economies of the West. The Zero Hedge article was almost kind of like blaming China for reducing the profitability for other folks in that space. Lithium mining. On a related note, the state of Arkansas believes they have 19 million tons of lithium in that state. It's actually a cavity that rolls through Arkansas and actually goes down into Mexico. This would make Arkansas one of the biggest producers of lithium in the United States with a street value of $150 billion. In other news, this is a joke. In other news, Arkansas has been hit by a hurricane and an earthquake in the same week, along with Aurora Borealis. The U.S. military has said that even though Arkansas is legally part of the United States, they may still need to invade anyway to guarantee freedom. Speaking of taking your lithium, when it comes to your personal dose of lithium, please keep the following in mind. The U.S. election was decided months ago. That doesn't mean that Donald is going to win. I'm just saying it was determined months ago. Voting will still matter as it will enable the elites to see the mood of the public. The bigger item to determine is what sort of deal was reached with the winning candidate. What you will see is unbelievable psychological operations in the weeks ahead and following, so strap in. You'll see a lot of garbage about voting patterns, what voters think, and similar. What I can tell you is literally everything you are seeing about the U.S. economy is complete illusion, and for that matter, the global economy. The stuff you're hearing about a soft economic landing is to not agitate an already agitated public any further. The agitation will come probably around January or February. Mike Moore at True Pundit. For those of you who know Mike's work at his True Pundit program, you'll recall the risks he took going after the CDC and the NIH, among others, back in 2020 with the inside information he had been given by folks that are in his network. He has chosen a new target in late 2024 and 2025. His new target is he's going after the Ivy League schools for two primary things. First is essentially laundering money from groups like the Clinton or Ford foundations, and second is foreign government funding programs at those schools who border on espionage. He has people inside federal agencies feeding him information about how far down the rabbit hole goes. In particular, certain FBI agents who either trained under or were actually still around back in the 1990s when they thought they were going after the Clinton, and then all that evidence got destroyed in Oklahoma City. From an initial program he had on this topic, it's impressive what he's already covered. It's worth pointing out this is an old trick in working with local or federal agencies. Their leaders are worried about the political consequences of certain actions, what they call optics, and avoiding prosecuting certain groups. Folks inside their agencies or the leaders themselves make sure the media gets the right kind of information in the right kind of way. Then the public outcry forces action who provides cover to said agencies. I have a feeling this is what's occurring here, and Moore is perfect for this. He's worked with agencies and has the right contacts and years of doing so. He's also pretty good at knowing if he's being used for purposes he doesn't agree with. He also knows the federal court system very well and what kind of information would force a reaction. I look forward to his further coverage of this topic, and I also know it's going to be extensive. Further, I would think it would open the door to some fascinating FOIA submissions by Veles when the time is right, based on what disclosures are made. I wish Mike and his young bucks great luck in this project they're working on, as well as the safety of angels. I'd also remind you all of the line and the quote from the movie The Godfather, the first one, where Michael looks at Tom Hagen and Sonny and says, "We got people in the newspapers, don't we? I think they might like a story like that." A good book. Speaking of physical asset economies, V recently made me aware of a book titled Why the West Can't Win by Fadi Lama, and it's a great book who I'm still reading. I think Andrei Martinov said it best in his recommendation, stating that the book is a good primer on the economic forces shaping the modern geopolitical world. For those of you who've heard my segment about 4 or 5 layers of truth about the world we live in, and that layers 4 and 5 are the ones that are always very difficult to find, I would tell you this book is definitely in category 4, if not touching 5. Without delving too deep into the book, it covers Bretton Woods, the worldview behind it, gold, Richard Nixon, Unit 731, the famous Japanese biolabs, and the list goes on. There's much in the book who are data points many of you are familiar with or may know in detail. The beauty of Lama's book is they take all of that and they synthesize it into a very understandable series of narratives. It helps predominantly clarify the battle between one group of neo-colonial neo-feudalists versus sovereigntists. As Martinov said, it's a primer. In fact, I would tell you, for folks you know who are only now beginning to move into the types of topics you and our audience have known for some time, this is a great place for them to begin their journey. I highly recommend you pick up a copy of the book. And a sidebar before our next topic. It's another way to view the massive levels of migration of foreign nationals across the Europe and the United States, because it's a tool to weaken sovereign countries. V, did you want to weigh in on that before I move to my next item?
Repeat that again.
Did you want to talk about the book, Why the West Can't Win?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you said it best. One of the things that Dr. Fadi Lama does, and I recommend picking it up for everybody. I've been trying to recommend it to all my friends and whatnot, because it simply puts what I've been talking about, like everything that I would like wanted to say that's in my head. This guy codified it and put it into a book, and it gives you, in the most easiest way to understand, why the actual physical reality on the ground. There's so many real physical challenges that, in spite of how many white papers these jackasses write, all the machinations of think tanks and all these other guys, there's the real reality on the ground. And you get that book by Dr. Fadi Lama, you understand it all. And look, you have the BRICS. They just made the announcement. Putin was holding the concept payment system in his hand. We are living in a very fast-moving and incredible time it's incredible to see where we are. There's incredible opportunities here. And look, here's the deal. It's, you get this book, you pay, you queue into a program like here that what Veles is doing, and you're right here on Rogue, you get a real good understanding of where we are and where we're headed. Go ahead, Veles.
Thanks, brother. I was going to share with all of you folks a clip from Bram Stoker's Dracula where Van Helsing is talking to, I wouldn't say disbelievers, but people that are trying to get their minds around the incredibleness of dealing with an actual vampire, and him confronting them and saying, when you eliminate all the other possibilities, whatever's left is the truth, no matter how much you don't want to deal with it. I'm not going to play that clip, V, because it's I don't want to test YouTube too much today, so we'll move on. But the one thing I will say is the reason I was going to show that clip, among other reasons, because it relates to the content we're covering today, is that as far as believability, everybody, or you hear the words or you see the stories about horrible things,
we can play it in like 30-second increments. That's like minute 58.
That's okay.
It's sure? Okay.
I'll post I'll post it on Discord, folks. You can
yeah. Okay.
You can watch it after class. But it's hard, even for those of us who've been researching this stuff for years. Even people like me that I wrote graduate school level papers on a number of topics, including the arms industry and human rights violations. And even that, as I'm looking at the documentation from law firms and doctors and others about the totality of what happened, it's still really hard to get your head around it. So the other advantage of that clip is before we even get into the P. Diddy stuff today, it's like I was saying, you hear the words, but it's still like, yeah, I've heard that, but it's like until you've lived it or experienced it, it's the old Ross Perot comment about hearing the mullahs of Iran are cutting off the hands of infidels, just a story in the nightly news, unless you're on the streets of Tehran trying to get your people out. So we've heard, for instance, that Playboy magazine was a blackmail scheme. But again, it's a story. There's a handful of articles or books that have been written about that. Victoria's Secret models were a blackmail scheme. The musical group the Pussycat Dolls were a blackmail scheme. Diddy and others in the hip hop genre were a blackmail scheme. But the thing that we've got to get our heads around is it's the entire fabric of the world we're living in has these blackmail schemes. And I'm gonna get into some heavy stuff about that topic later, both factually as well as theoretical. And we'll go there in a minute. A familiar dynamic. I've said previously, Jeff Epstein is dead because of what he knew, and Ghislaine Maxwell remains alive, in theory at least, because of what she knows. Of course, we're not quite sure where she is, but anyway, it appears for now the same dynamic is true of P. Diddy. In Veles' book, Diddy should have been taken out of the game before last August. We all knew where things were headed last spring, and it was allowed to continue. That obviously was not the case with the recent news of the suspected suicide of the entertainer Liam Page. Yes, Liam evidently had connections to Diddy, but those were not discussed by the media, nor will they be, because he's no longer around. However, Diddy is still around. Several Hollywood and entertainment figures have been paid huge amounts of money to secure NDAs with people who know things. So now the next phase, does Diddy die in prison? We shall see. Hot off the presses, we have the former CEO of Abercrombie and some of his lieutenants being accused of trafficking young men. Of course, a ton of people knew what was going on for years, so why now are we investigating it? Going one step further, everyone knew what was happening with Harvey Weinstein and the triumvirate of Epstein, Brunel, and Nygaard, and then suddenly the whole roof caved in. Why is this, my friends? And note the constant succession of those assets being removed. Keyword, assets. Recall also, blackmail has an inflation factor of whom Patrick Ryan has commented upon, and I'll get to Patrick a little later. Weinstein is evidently going to die of cancer in prison soon, and the day after that story, we had the Abercrombie story come out immediately after. I was amused by the timing. Equally, though, Harvey Weinstein has several existing health problems, and when I heard he now has cancer, I recalled what occurred to Jack Ruby, but that's another story. These events are not isolated, my friends. They're connected. They've been going on for years. It's a pattern, and someone powerful would need to be behind this, as typically you take out an asset and the other side responds, and the other side usually responds hard. Yet all these assets keep getting shut down with a lot of suspicious deaths. The other item to consider is we keep having media language about people compelled to have sex. If they go a bit further, they say sexual trafficking. Further still, some are saying human trafficking. Yet what's the correct language? How about forced prostitution of minors? Yet even further still, pedophilia. They use the words underage sexual partners, but that's because they cannot say the P word, pedophilia, of which we have that going on with all these known traffickers and blackmailers. Keep in mind something very important in all of this. We're not just dealing with sexual acts with kids. Further, we know in order to play the game, many are forced into these acts. There's more, though. Why do you think you keep hearing this narrative repeatedly of groups of people standing around while these acts take place? Did you think that's a misprint? To paraphrase the movie The Matrix, did you see the agent or were you looking at the woman in the red dress? Why would large groups of people be standing around while these sexual acts are taking place? Because that is also part of the blackmail, even if you're not taking part. You're further humiliated individually and collectively as part of this beyond the primary people engaged in the act. You're humiliated because you are shown how powerless you are in that world. Remember the narrative about why so many African American men are made to wear a dress in movies. They've also made Eminem wear dresses too, folks. Here's an amusing question. Given this topic, as a good head of steam right now, powerful people are understandably nervous. The media wants you to believe it's because someone may have attended a Diddy party or at some point in the past. No, my friends, that's not it at all. I'll tell you what the situation is. This is the collapse of a structure or a key piece of the modern world. A collapse who's taking out Hollywood notables, people in high finance, real estate, R&B artists, athletes, rock stars, and the list goes on. Further, when I say people are being taken out, I don't just mean they're being arrested or dead. Care to note how many people are not being offered new movies or TV programs right now? How many people are not being given lucrative financial endorsements right now? Death is just one way to send a message, and there's 100 things worse than death, and you're dealing with players who know all of them. What does a fall from stardom do to a person, as we have so many examples, including the famous life story of Maureen McCormick, who played Marcia on the Brady Bunch TV show in the 1970s? Plus, referencing Liam, who I brought up a moment ago, it's kind of been tucked away inside those articles about his suicide, but all of his endorsements and all of his music deals were canceled the day before he killed himself. People are scared not because they could be connected to a high-profile person. They're scared because the fabric of several social systems is being taken down by someone or someone's powerful enough to overwhelm opposition to it being taken down. It also includes some of the more shadowy people, too, via some private airplane crashes and boat sinkings I've covered recently. Basically, if you're famous or powerful or very wealthy and you hang out with people on the East or West Coast, if I were you, I'd leave the country like a month ago. I know a guy from Rogue News. He might be able to help you with that. Lastly, how do elites often kill men? Say it with me. They kill them by strangulation. And yes, I'll say it. When elites kill a man by strangulation or a woman by drowning, it's part of their rituals and their beliefs. It's never just murder, but a ritual killing, just like the depth of coverage we've had the last few months on Jack the Ripper and what really happened there. That goes for either side doing the killing among the elites. Remember, they have their belief systems and rituals as well. Patrick Ryan, noting my prior reference, Patrick made a comment recently worth sharing. He said, and I quote, "The Anglo order would massacre everyone who shares 3% of your DNA. They've done this many times since 1940. Thus, the importance of blackmail inflation. It wipes out their control layer, which hobbles their coordination layer, allowing technology to sneak past the ever-vigilant and paranoid British SOFON." Small aside, just to note everybody, a SOFON is a reference to the Netflix series The Three-Body Problem. They're proton-sized supercomputers in that storyline who act like little spies.
One of my favorite books, sci-fi books. Have you read this book yet?
No, I'm sure it's going to be like Game of Thrones. I'll get to it in 3 years.
God, it's so bloody good. It's an alien invasion And the aliens are not what you think. That's number one. And by the time they get to Earth, the people on Earth know that they have 400 years to prepare for this invasion. And that book series is that 400-year gap before these guys finally arrive, and all the drama that goes with it. You will not believe it. Highly recommend The Three Body Problem. Go watch it. I mean, go read it. It's even better than the Netflix series. I haven't seen the Netflix series, but the book is my favorite sci-fi book. So good. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and that storyline reminds me of something the Shadows would do, which is to place you under duress, and at the end of the duress, you're better than you were before. So that's what the Sophons are. And then returning to Patrick's quote, all technology is a threat to the Anglo order. All technology. The Anglos hate technology. They're perpetually appalled humans even exist. If the Anglo order had their way, they would de-evolve us back to bacteria. Eliminate the blackmail, and the Anglo order can no longer coordinate at maximum efficiency. The Anglos hate technology so much, they were one of a handful of people who reverted back to the Stone Age when the Romans left. Imagine having aqueducts and complex trade being given to you as your reward for surrendering to Rome, then abandoning it all to go back to your straw huts, which use human feces as plaster. The British literally did this. They hate technology, unquote.
Why is that, dude? That's just crazy.
Well, and as with any statement by Patrick, there's a lot to unpack there. So when he refers to the Anglos, folks, he's talking about the London Corporation or the royal family. Then recall the statement by Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth's husband, who stated in 1988 during an interview, if he were to be reincarnated, he would like to return as a deadly virus to help solve the overpopulation problem.
That makes sense, yes.
When Patrick says the Anglos would love to de-evolve us back to bacteria, he's not kidding. This is why this segment parallels what I said about the destruction of blackmail networks. If you destroy blackmail networks, you severely harm the London Corporation. The globalist London Corporation camp also want to reduce technology's effectiveness and our ability to use it because blackmail or not, it helps you get through the distractions. And this is another reason why you're listening to Rogue News. Now, on that topic, in a related way, but this may be a bit upsetting. Bless me, Father, for I have blackmailed. My third segment on this narrative about blackmail is a Veles theory of the following. The Los Angeles Diocese of the Catholic Church is offering $1.5 billion in settlements to those harmed by priests in the church. The settlement follows decades of cover-ups and a movement of offenders to other parishes to let stories quiet down. Leveraging positions of trust, folks, is nothing new, and one need only look at the surge in women teachers being found guilty of having sex with kids to make my point. Here's my thought, and I believe this is a Rogue exclusive. Abuse of predominantly kids, but also adults, has occurred with many faiths and social institutions. Unfortunately, we must add the Boy Scouts to that, as well as the Girl Scouts as well. The Catholic Church seems to have weaponized it. Further, we also know religion has been leveraged by the powerful and governments for years. We're only now in the beginning stages of understanding how far Operation Gladio went, both with governments and the Catholic Church. Let's not forget the Vatican Bank while we're at it. What has improved is our understanding of the blackmail systems, how they functioned, who ran them. To oversimplify, you need to blackmail the blackmailers. Therefore, if you're blackmailing priests and priests conduct confession in the church, think of the level of information that gives you, especially if you have a parish located in a high-profile area like Washington, D.C. or New York City. My God, you'll know every high-profile person who has a kid with a drug problem, who's sleeping with who knows a major corporation's about to go under, and the list goes on. Not to mention all the stressed-out police officers and government agents who need the sanctity of the confessional to get something off their chest. When I attended Notre Dame, I always raised an eyebrow at the fact one of the schools the CIA likes to recruit from is Notre Dame. I say that because the CIA is very provincial and they prefer Ivy League East Coast schools. Occasionally, they might allow someone from Stanford in there. Yet Notre Dame seemed outside their orbit. The reasoning given was that the students historically are patriotic and loyal. One does have to wonder how far down the rabbit hole goes. Given the incredible stories we've heard over the last 2 years on many topics, I'm now of the belief there may be more going on with the church. To be blunt, the pedophilia in the church is not the total truth. The total truth being the confessional was leveraged as an intelligence gathering device for more than 100 years. Pedophilia was the mechanism by which they kept the machinery operating. By the way, given the stories from the United Kingdom, the Church of England may have some explaining to do as well. V, help me out. Who's the guy? He was in Clinton's administration. He's on one of those Meet the Press. He's Greek.
Stephanopoulos?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Folks, and my Greek friends were the ones who told me this. Any of you want to guess what George Stephanopoulos' father did?
Oh, that's a good one.
He's an Orthodox priest.
Mm.
Joke in D.C. was, yeah, I wonder how much information Stephanopoulos' father fielded to him when he was working in government.
Yeah.
They drop like flies. One more on a related note to blackmail and information control. Did anyone notice that Susan Wojcicki died? Veles, who the heck is that?
Oh, yeah. She was the former CEO of YouTube. She was the major person that during the 2020 event, the global event of 2020, she's the one that absolutely went hardcore in terms of censoring and deplatforming the whole 9 yards, man. Yep.
Absolutely.
And
so she died.
Was triple vaccine boosted, no less, Veles. Triple vaccine boosted.
Of course she was. She died of lung cancer at 56 last August.
Yep.
She was in charge of YouTube from 2014 to 2023. Her 19-year-old son died of a drug overdose last March, and then she died in August. Boy, they know how to send a message.
Wow.
Well,
there you go.
This is a Veles comment. Do you know how easy it is to kill someone with an existing drug habit by tainting their drugs?
Yeah,
it doesn't
just drop
need
a little
to be,
bit of fentanyl.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be meth, folks. It can just be marijuana.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she originally was hired by Google back in 1999. She was employee number 16. And in 2006, she advocated for the $1.65 billion purchase by Google of YouTube. And as V said, she's the one who gave the order to shut down anybody's programming, including Rogue News, during the coup. And then she's also the one that saw to it that those little blue boxes pop up when you're covering content that the man doesn't agree with, saying, this is all disinformation, there's no truth to the theory, blah, 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 blah. So when I said keep people in key structures of the world are dropping like flies, you have to see the whole picture, not just the entertainment industry. Imagine the stories she could have told if she wasn't dead, such as who gave her the order, why, when, what did she know about the motivations, how was she rewarded, and the list goes on. And another comment about this blackmail topic. One of the first analogies I used on Rogue when I first joined V and CJ 4 years ago was the following. The SNL episode where the angel's sitting next to the guy on the bench and tells him, if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. And the guy says, well, what's the most incredible thing there is? And the angel says, I can't tell you that. You couldn't take it. You'd wink out of existence. And the guy says, okay, what's the 1,000th most incredible thing there is? And the angel looks at him seriously and says, professional wrestling is real. And the guy goes, you're kidding. And the angel says, I know, right? That's why I can't tell you the most incredible thing there is. I'm growing in my belief, in all seriousness, that when it comes to the blackmail topic, among many others, folks, it's being revealed in pieces. It's being revealed in segments because it is so dark. It is so pervasive. It is so consistent. It is so ingrained in so much of our lives. They simply have to give it to us in pieces, much like, I got to go there, the 33 levels of the Scottish Rite of the Masonic Order, that you can't possibly know what a 33 degree knows without being on this journey. And I hate to use that analogy, but it is a journey. And it has to be revealed in pieces because folks simply couldn't handle the truth, the whole truth, if they were told in one sitting. Mental outlook. You know what artificial intelligence would be really good at doing? Scrubbing the internet as well as scientific journals of everything you no longer want in the public domain. Speaking of
the perfect memory hole cleaner,
the Anglos. This is why, folks, I've been saying for so long, you literally need physical copies of anything of importance to you and backing up your stuff on an external drive that isn't connected to your computer or your cell phone for that matter. I wish there was something available beyond DVDs to acquire old TV programs or documentaries when it comes to physical media, other than saving those programs to an external backup drive. Plus my old favorite, books. I shared with all of you that I picked up some beyond the normal obscure books that, Veles, there were only 5 copies published. This is one of them. It's like the Ninth Gate. I've picked up some books the last 2 to 3 years in particular that were very hard to get a hold of, on everything from international affairs, but also archaeology, some Alan Alford stuff that hadn't been in print in 20 years that I was able to get myself a copy of, just because I don't want 10 years from now to be living the scene with Knox from the original 1989 Batman, where he saw Jack Napier be pushed into the vat of chemicals, and the cop on the other end of the phone says, "Oh, well, he committed suicide." Suicide! I was there. Rumble. I've mentioned on prior programs about the good stuff being done on Rumble by Lieutenant Colonel Steve Murray. In fact, one of his listeners told him Rogue News listens to his content, which we thought was cool, that he thinks we're cool. We think he's cool too. Recently, a program called Coffee and Mike, which is a separate person out there with their own program called Coffee and Mike, M-I-K-E. He had in one sitting Lieutenant Colonel Murray, Alex Craner, and Tom Luongo. Boy, I was reaching for my medication when those 3 guys were on the same show. You can find it on Rumble. It aired on Wednesday, October 16th. I say around because for some reason with the Coffee and Mike guys' programs, the dates don't appear on his shows. It just says how many days ago it was aired. There were many excellent comments during that show by all the attendees. One of the items Lieutenant Colonel Murray noted was the fact we have too many people in the U.S. government who hold more than one citizenship. And that's true, by the way, folks, and the numbers are a lot higher than you might believe. I can also tell you that in the work I used to do when I had a top secret or similar clearance, depending on whose agency and what their clearance levels were, there is no way on God's green earth I would have been allowed to have dual citizenship. None. Zero. Absolutely none. So it blows my mind that the heads of certain key federal agencies are people with 2 or 3 citizenships outside of the United States. And not to sound like an old guy in rural Mississippi, but I'll tell you what, there is no way in the 70s or the 80s you would have ever had people even in lower level positions where that would have been allowed. But anyway, Coffee and Mike also had on a guy, the guy's program, Coffee and Mike. He had on another interview with a gentleman named Dr. Jack Kruse, Kruse. And my thanks to the Rogue listeners who posted that program on the Discord page. Boy, that guy was a double latte with jet fuel. He's a little rough, but that's okay. And given what he was saying about his take on our world, it was a mind scrambler. And only Jack could be the kind of guy that's so good at what he does that he could insult his own host on the host's show and have the host agree with him. Don't worry, Short Bus Mooner. There's always the ability to play replay. Bridges. We've seen various rituals conducted by the elites, especially the last 2 years, who we know they were ritual, but the total meaning is elusive. We've had several bridge collisions this year by various types of vessels, not to mention the red-on-red painting of King Charles, among others. The gentleman who runs the Donut Factory on YouTube, D-O-E-N-U-T, had a program called The Ritual is Almost Complete on October 12th. He focused on the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco for a future event. What future event did he suggest may happen? Well, he went there. He said either the bridge collapsing via some means or at least being struck by something to catch national or global attention. His reasoning is the significance of the number 128 and the significance of that bridges in general in elite rituals. In the case of the latter, various references to things being bridged or crossed when it comes to old financial systems and the new one. Various bridge-related events are part of the global elite's rituals announcing these changes, according to Donut. And I would say you can make that argument. Bridging of celestial events as well, bridging of global events, changes from one type of system to another, etc. The Golden Gate Bridge, when measured from the large towers on each side, is 1,280 meters from end to end, or 128. There are also, interestingly, 128 lampposts on that bridge as well. In forms of numerology, 128 signifies new beginnings, balance, harmony, and abundance of material success. Some identify the number 128 with angels or the language of angels as well. Another area he touches upon in that broadcast was the ever-growing godlike presence of Joe Rogan, who is by design, and I would agree with that. What Mike Moore refers to as your approved trading card heroes. I've said this before on Rogue programs about Rogan. I like several of his interviews, and at the same time, he's a paid resource, and that's a fact. As a result, let's keep an eye on the Golden Gate Bridge or any other major significant bridges. V, it's probably a good thing that you're no longer living in New York.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? By the way, anyone want to guess how many engines on Elon Musk's latest rocket? It's 33. Absolutely coincidence, folks. Absolutely coincidence, because powerful elites do not make decisions at that granular level who relate to their complex belief systems. Threes.
Right. And it's known as the Dragon, right?
Yes. Not that that doesn't have a frightening significance for people who understand comets. Threes. How many brides does Dracula have before he pursued Mina Harker? He has 3. And that's in the 1930s black and white film with Bela Lugosi and the 2 contemporary films of Bram Stoker's Dracula and the movie Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman. How many brides does the CEO in Under the Silver Lake have before they travel to his tomb? He has 3. How many did the guy before him? He had 3. Notice the patterns, my friends. So V, if you'll play that Elite Information Dynamics clip, it's the second clip.
Okay.
And folks, this clip is very interesting. It is about a Russian anthropologist who came up with the value of information while using a rather kind of wacky reference. So V, if you'll play that clip.
Trying to find it, man.
I will give it to you in the chat thing.
Yeah, please. I don't see it in the email.
There. It's in the private chat.
Okay. 1 second. Hold on. Just trying to line it up.
No, that's
games they play, right?
I think you've got the is that the right clip? I think you've got the Bram Stoker's clip up.
Yeah, that what you want me to play? Or
no, the one I just put in the private chat.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to pull up right now. Give me 1 second, man.
No, it should be a Twitter.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. All right, cool. Remember, folks, we've got other jobs.
Have you ever heard of a game called Werewolf?
No.
Everyone gets a piece of paper. It's either got villager written on it, but 2 have the word werewolf. Someone runs the game to make sure no one's cheating, and they go, okay, it's nighttime, everyone close your eyes. Werewolves choose someone to kill, and the werewolves go. They say, okay, everyone close your eyes, it's morning time, open them again. During the night, Francis was killed. There's then a conversation, and this is where it gets interesting, between all the villagers and the 2 werewolves over who the werewolves are. Then at the end of the day, the villagers have to decide who they're going to kill, and they say, well, we're going to kill Constantine. It's revealed by the person running the game, I'm afraid Constantine was a villager. And the game continues. The villagers win the game if they kill both werewolves. The werewolves win the game if they kill all but 2 villagers. And the werewolves usually win. The game was invented by a student of sociology in Russia who wanted to prove his thesis that an uninformed majority will always lose a battle of information against an informed minority. So that just shows when you have hidden information, you can completely manipulate a large group of people.
Wow.
So there you are, folks. Small group of people who never let the public have all the information. A clever solution to AI power demands. I've seen examples like what I'm about to cover previously, and things like this do happen. Case in point, when I worked in telecommunications, I was there when the Colors project was tested and then used in communications. What was it? For years, whenever you ran fiber optic cable, the devices on both ends of the cable segment would use red laser light. Comments were made by well-learned people to the effect, why would you use anything else? Because red enables a maximum power of signals better than any other color. There's some debate on that depending on the PhD you speak to, but that was the general theme back in the 1990s. Also, frankly, producing red lasers at that time was a lot cheaper than other colors. As a result, everyone's focus was on how to leverage different frequencies within the red color spectrum to move as much data as possible. Then someone pulled the Roger Bannister 4-minute mile example. They said, well, wait a minute. If each strand of glass is pumping all that light energy, we could simultaneously emit a multitude of colors, including red and all the others, and blow the doors off how much data goes through just a single strand. People also keep in mind the big fiber optic pipes between data centers usually contain dozens, if not hundreds, of strands of those filaments. When MCI Communications first started rolling out the Colors Project in the 1990s, you didn't need to build more data centers nor run more lines, but you could increase data throughput many times over beyond just using red. So with that example, let's turn to artificial intelligence. And by the way, mind you, I didn't find this in my normal plethora of information technology websites, but I found it on none other than oilprice.com. As we've covered on Rogue, we have a perfect storm with artificial intelligence right now. Production issues with the new generations of computer chips needed for those calculations, immense storage needs, data centers can't be built fast enough, and the big one, the U.S. power grid just doesn't have the juice for all this. The article also identified the computational power necessary to sustain the growth of AI is doubling every 100 days. For instance, ChatGPT needs around 560 megawatts each day, and that's enough power for 18,000 homes. Further, multiple influential people are pushing micronuclear reactors as a solution and want your tax dollars upon which they can build their empires. Another group wants to leverage quantum computing because they think they have a solution too. Then the following occurred. There's an integer additional algorithm who could reduce the energy footprint of artificial intelligence by 95%. You heard me correctly, 95%.
Huge.
Now, I'll say this now. Whoever was the person or the team who discovered this, you get free parking anywhere in America for life. This approach does not use the complex floating point multiplication, or FPM method, but uses what's known as integer addition. This is also known as linear complexity multiplication, or L-MUL. The important thing, because many people would say this, is, yeah, but is it as good as FPM? And the answer is it is. It sustains the accuracy and the precision of FPM with some slight areas where it doesn't. Now, here's the rub. All the new chips that NVIDIA and all the others have been rushing into production to support these new levels of AI that we need, they cannot use LMUL as they were never designed to use it. A ton of firms across the IT industry, from chip makers to private equity, were betting on FPM. But a 95% reduction in power consumption is just too big to ignore. Hard decisions are going to have to be made, and I'm sure there'll be some tax breaks, tax forgiveness, if not downright refinancing of losses to deal with this. Now, we're not dispensing investment advice on Rogue, but you may want to research companies who are going to build chips or systems who are compatible with LMUL. You could make a couple bucks. Bear with me just a second there. Pricey. Raytheon is going to pay the Justice Department nearly $1 billion for a bribery fine. The $950 million fine is for military contracts involving Qatar, where one of the bribed officials was a relative of the emir, where the company paid that person $30 million. I have a feeling the entire reason why this saw the light of day is because a competitor conducted their own investigation into business they lost, and they turned Raytheon in. Boy, what a bad time for that to happen with the massive flow of defense cash that's flowing into the defense sector right now. Consulting fraud. Not to be outdone, none other than McKinsey is going to be paying a $500 million fine in relation to their consulting work with pharmaceutical firms selling opiates. The crime being aiding the selling of those opiates via sales analysis and marketing advice. McKinsey's comment about the whole thing is what they did was technically legal, but it did fall short of their high standards. I've worked with many of the big consulting practices like McKinsey. Spare me, boys, you have no standards. Your standards are hit your damn sales number and delivery margin, or your butt's out the door. Since 1999, estimates are nearly 700,000 people have died from opiate addiction. First, that's more than 500,000 people, folks, and it's often centered in metro areas who had a history of rough working conditions in industries like mining, steel, and manufacturing, among others. The wear and tear on people's bodies made their later years incredibly painful, and pain management was essential. This made them a perfect target for these drugs. Second, the terms of this agreement are to remain confidential, so we'll never really know what was done by whom, about what on this topic. Third, not to be indelicate, but that's a lot of funerals, folks. Granted, it's over a roughly 20-year period, but that's still a lot of funerals. I don't recall anyone during those years commenting to me, "Gee, Veles, another funeral of someone we know from opiates again. What do you think's going on?" And I live in an area near one of the ground zeros of that epidemic. And if you knew people in that town, you knew there was a problem. However, I assure you, no one in local media ran that story, much less the national media, until it was at the end of the process. Now, my friends, consider for a moment the potential loss of life from drugs given during 2020 with the same terminal outcome. Therefore, when people say things like, "You couldn't have that many people die from those shots and nobody would notice," actually, maybe you could. What is past is prologue. This is the strap-in section, folks. And give me a little room with this. I'm going to be a little all over the board, and it does have a reference to board games, too. During one of my airline flights last week, I had an epiphany, and most of this segment was written at about 30,000 feet over the western United States. I'll say the part I normally reserve for the end up front and then work my way from there. This is purely my own belief, and as your humble host during the last 4 years with all of you, I continue to grow in my belief that human history for the last several thousand years has been influenced, if not directed, by one of two things. Either a sentient form of technology left behind from before the last ice age, if not millennia before even that, or the survivors of the last cataclysm still walk among us, or more accurately, their descendants do, and their accompanying technology do as well. My belief on this has developed over 30 years of research, experience, and debriefings from everyone from RAND to MITRE and defense and foreign affairs conferences I'd rather not mention on the air. In fact, I've alluded to this narrative on prior programs before delving into it here in more detail. Like any hypothesis, I'm open to other interpretations and data who may alter it. This belief includes the idea our species on this planet continues to be part of a grand experiment, as well as a series of smaller experiments whose goals and purposes at times simply elude us. For those of you who've seen the movie The Forgotten, who stars Julianne Moore, you'll recall the focus being on a woman who believes strongly she has a son who everyone keeps telling her doesn't exist. I'm sorry about this, but I have to give away a lot of the plot in order to make my point today. You find out later in the film the disappearance of her son is one of many children who are taken from their parents, the purpose being to test whether human beings have more than a biological connection with their children. Can a parent be made to forget their own child? What we find out toward the end of the film is an alien intelligence is conducting these experiments simply because they can. Equally, the entire intelligence community works behind the scenes to cover up those experiments. When intelligence personnel or others involved in these cover-ups are confronted by our protagonists, those agents reply to the effect, "What would you have us do? We're powerless against them," unquote. There's a scene where one agent is being interrogated by our protagonists, where Julianne Moore's character is trying to find her son and whispers to the agent who's tied to a chair, "We won't tell anyone, they won't know." The agent whispers back to her, exhausted, "They already do," and then moments later is sucked through the roof of the cabin into the sky, never to be seen again. Am I saying our current situation is hopeless or futile based on that reference of the movie? Certainly not, and I'm only using it as a reference point. Equally, in the movie, she and her male counterpart do succeed in getting their kids back, as even the aliens have superiors when the experiments go wrong. Then we have the 1960s early Twilight Zone episode called The Old Man in the Cave. Survivors of a nuclear war must rely on some sage living on a mountain to guide them on what food or water is still safe for them, among other decisions. The episode later reveals the man in the cave is a computer who's guiding them, and in their anger, because supposedly computers started the nuclear war, they destroy it. This results in the deaths, of course, as no one is left to guide them. Another example is a favorite I've shared with you on the character Landru from the Star Trek episode The Return of the Archons. The storyline being a race on another planet was on the verge of destroying themselves in war. One of their leaders created a planetary supercomputer who would guide society, and equally, they would live in a period in their history much like Earth in the 1880s. The character Landru in the story, before dying, has the computer manage society in a highly controlled way, with only brief occasions where people could let loose and enjoy a bacchanalian-like free-for-all every 12 hours or so, for around 12 hours or so. The Enterprise crew once again decides to violate the Prime Directive on the grounds the machine is preventing the population from developing naturally as a society. The machine left by Landru is destroyed in the interest of letting the planet's inhabitants be free to make their own decisions again. Who's our chief suspect behind my specific take on human events the last few thousand years? Other than aliens on the White House lawn, of course. In my mind, there's two primary candidates. Candidate one is a prior civilization who survived the last ice age and exists in our world but is hidden in some way. Consider for a moment that in less than 100 years, human beings went from powered flight on a beach in North Carolina by two Ohio bicycle shop owners to landing on the moon. Granted, the moon landing was rough, but they did make it. Yes, I know for a number of you, Kubrick probably either filmed the first landing or faked the first one. Subsequent landings did take place, however. If we achieved that in 100 years, what does 10,000 years give you from the last ice age to now? I would tell you it gives you forms of stealth technology beyond our imagination and probably some amazing nanotechnology, among others. I would throw in re-engineering our DNA as well, being a capability. Option 2 is an ancient technology from the past is still operating, and for whatever reason it's guiding or directing humanity. There are many elements you could explore with those two options or variations thereof. For me, though, it boils down to something like those two options. I've come to that conclusion for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which is several patterns in human history. Others who dabble in these things and who I respect have cautioned me to consider there may be certain behaviors or patterns in human beings who simply are, whether it's by God's will or the universe or certain grand patterns beyond our capacity to understand, but they simply exist. I'm willing to entertain that, but I'm sticking to my theory until I have more data to prove the latter. Let me return to something I shared with you in some prior programs, that being the Roger Bannister 4-minute mile. For years, the learned among us said it was impossible to run a mile faster than 4 minutes. Then Roger achieved it. Did he have advanced shoes or clothes to achieve that feat? No. Yes, he was a good athlete, but the key factor was he believed he could beat the 4-minute mile. The more important part is once he did, though, many others also ran a mile in under 4 minutes. This included Bannister breaking his own record a few times. So obviously they proved that theory. The only thing who changed, enabling the achievement of those who followed, was the internalization it was possible. Said another way, the idea became a manifested reality. It was a combination of human will and a plan to get there. Then the avalanche started, with many other athletes achieving it as well. Like a machine working out a problem, once a test case was proven, then other living beings went about proving his achievement. Am I saying the sentient machine or our predecessors put the idea in Bannister's head he could achieve this athletic accomplishment? Not necessarily, but it does demonstrate what humanity can do, especially collectively, when the conditions are right. The trigger for today's segment was a Time Life magazine copy who covered the story of the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons, a game I played for a few years in middle and high school. I'll boil down the article in the interest of time. Loosely said, role-playing games, or RPGs, and in particular Dungeons & Dragons, was the culmination of decades of prior pulp fiction writing. You cannot have one without the other. Beyond the use of imagination and creativity in playing of Dungeons & Dragons, we have the use of various multi-sided dice, for whom the most well-known is the famous 20-sided dice. That may not seem like a big deal, but to people a lot smarter than me in mathematics, software, and related, it was supremely critical to the IT boom of the 1980s and the 1990s, who in turn led to the massive growth in high-speed communication networks, enabling all that technology to interact with itself, as well as the users behind it. When I worked in telecom, many coworkers had sets of RPG dice on their desks, not to mention when trying to calculate various network speeds or software configurations, people would literally mention in meetings a particular multi-sided die as a reference point when calculating things who are always divisible by 8. You've heard me mention often the sacred and the mystical importance of that number, among others on other programs. And by the way, that's the God's honest truth. Everything in technology is divisible by 8. I'm not kidding. Returning to my narrative, the people who played those games were often of a particular social demographic. They just needed a nudge and an outlet for their ideas. Said another way, they needed to see Bannister run the 4-minute mile in less than 4 minutes. They could take it from there. What began as role-playing games enabled human creativity to find new avenues for social interactions and networking among like-minded people, not to mention certain numerical sequences who were always at the core of those games. When software development finally reached the right point, those role-playing games could be played on a computer. Once the networks reached enough speed, they could then be played online among many people at once. Those online games evolved into nearly limitless variety of games. Games who are also evolved beyond traditional game playing into simulations of human communities, such as the 1990s game The Sims. It also created new forms of addiction as well, because some people preferred to live in the game world rather than the real world. I would point out it was just yesterday the Daily Mail had an article about a young boy in Orlando who killed himself. He was chatting with an AI modeled on Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones. He became so enamored of his relationship with the AI, he would rather join her than stay in this world. Am I saying there's a linear correlation between Dungeons and Dragons and the future technology boom of the 1980s and 90s? No. I am saying there are many correlations between many of those things and how they're interconnected. Further, it's about patterns, as those patterns led to even more complex patterns who led to human development. That's a real Peter Thiel in Silicon Valley kind of experimentation, folks. However, it needs a mind thinking in hundreds of years of human development and not decades. That's why I return to the belief someone from our past is influencing us. It's worth noting that many players in D&D in those days were young kids. Those young kids, in turn, took what they learned, and then, as they became older, they entered the workforce. Once in the workforce, only they could be the right people to take technology and the human interaction in the right direction. Many famous authors and their literature types in history helped lay the foundation for things such as Dungeons & Dragons and other complex role-playing games. A pattern who helped contribute to the growth of what we know as technology in contemporary times, as well as what we did with that technology. This was not a 10-year timeline, folks, but a timeline of 100 or more years. Many well-known people in history contributed to this overall pattern. One of them being the famous Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek, a man who put things into popular culture in the mind of popular culture who took on a life of their own, not the least of which are supercomputers, cell phones, and advanced propulsion, among other concepts. You cannot have Neil Stephenson of Snow Crash fame without Roddenberry, and you cannot have Roddenberry without Jules Verne and so many others who came before Jules Verne. It is a pattern. Matthew Arrett has been invaluable in pointing out the hand through history of the Tavistock Institute and the London Corporation. I say that because many famous authors, and dare I use the word futurists as well, who contributed to popular culture were London Corporation assets, or at least on their payroll. In contemporary times, that now includes other elite players like the Davos Group. My argument is they may have been influenced by others when weren't even aware. Tom Luongo has pointed out the challenging dynamics of multiplayer games, especially when used to correlate our modern world. One could also call those simulations. The beauty of people like Tom is he does not view the world as operating the way they taught us in school or college, but how it really is. Specifically, certain apex elites we discuss on Rogue News often. For me, there's a significant missing variable in the equation. This is not an argument about all life must have meaning, my friends. Yes, this could all be by chance. Nor will I dare raise the ever-popular idea we're living in a simulation like the Matrix and perhaps floating in vats of fluid somewhere. I do believe, though, whether it is leftover technology from the past or our predecessors, one of them is still pulling the strings. Fascinatingly, there's a mischievous side to me who would love to discover that both the London Corporation and Davos may have been played without their realizing it. Given human nature, if it is our predecessors operating behind the scenes, then Babylon 5 reference of the Vorlons and the Shadows applies. Not one ancient civilization influencing our modern world, but two or more. The theme of that science fiction program where the Vorlons and the Shadows are trying to convince younger races their view of order and chaos is the right one. Pick one. If that analogy sticks, then it applies to everything from the book I mentioned, Why the West Cannot Win, to the conflict between the London Corporation and Davos, among others. We have two sides in conflict over differing views of how the world should be structured, not just in economics, but in society and access to technology, among a host of other considerations. To paraphrase Fadi Lama's book, a neo-colonial, neo-feudalistic side and a sovereigntist side, one focused on a world of control by a handful, and another with a view of relationships among sovereign entities. Neither is perfect, and let's be honest about that, but I sure as heck oppose the colonial and feudal version. Could it be our era reflects a very ancient argument when it comes to those two sides and their views? Perhaps we know them as the Atlantean view and the Lemurian, or perhaps they're known by other names. But it is a powerful game, though, the ultimate game, and one far grander than one played with a 20-sided die. I yield the floor. V?
Veles, that was awesome, man. Awesome. Great rundown. And folks, look, as with all these shows, go back and listen to it again because it's absolutely chock full of incredible information. So thank you so much, fellas.
Thank you, brother. And thank you,
And with
everyone,
that-
for listening.
Absolutely. And with that being said, folks, we're at the end of the show. We will be back. And with that being said, we're over and out. Cheers, everybody.